Hello, everybody. My name is Linda Frazee, and today I want to talk to you about taking good care of yourself from the Enneagram perspective. 9 types on the Enneagram, and each one has strengths and weaknesses when it comes to taking care of oneself. In my 40 years of working with people, when I talk about, I've been teaching people for 40 years to take care of themselves, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And in those 40 years, I've had some years where I did all 4 of those briefly, but most of the time, I was focused on one more than another. Now, because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, which is the big feeling type, my feelings could get in the way. So I've had to work on that myself, and I've helped many of others as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. So, first of all, the first type is the 1, and they're called sometimes the perfectionist or the reformer. They're very good about following orders. When they start a plan, they're right on purpose. That's the good news. Now, what doesn't work and what can get in their way is the fact that if they don't do it just right to their whole standards, their high standards, and so they could be moving right along and suddenly they don't walk the last mile, or they eat sugar when they said they wouldn't. And then they get disappointed in themselves, and they can do one of two things: either get very rigid with themselves, too hard on themselves, which never works, or just say, I'm just not going to even do this at all until I can do it perfect. So that's the 1. The 2 is called the helper. Now, the 2 has a different perspective altogether because they're so busy helping other people, henceforth the name helper, that they can forget themselves altogether. So, what works best for them when it comes to self care is being with somebody in a support group or an accountability partner, somebody who their heart and they respect and they stay on purpose. And that's a good way for them to stay into self-care. When I talk self-care, remember I'm talking emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. Most people just think of self-care as far as diet and exercise, but it's much more than that. Now we have the 3. The 3 is called the performer, and they're very, very big on achieving and getting things done. So what works for them, because if they don't schedule their own self-care, that it will get lost in all the achievements and all the busyness and all the hard work they have to go. So a 3 has to put it on their calendar. They literally have to put it on their calendar. Of course, I'm going to say accountability works. Accountability works with every type, but the 3's accountability is to get it in their schedule and then keep it in their schedule and maintain it. Now, the 4, the romantic, or the sometimes called the artist, is the type that I am. And that's partly about they're so emotional. Their emotions take up so much space that there's 2 real factors about self-care there: that the emotions can take all of the energy, and then other aspects don't get any air. It's like they take up all the air in the room, so to speak. And then the second thing is waiting until you feel like it. If you're a 4, you don't want to do it until you feel like it. Well, that doesn't really work for a regular practice of self-care in all of those areas. So there has to come some discipline. And one of my favorite sayings is freedom comes with discipline. So a 4 has to learn how to discipline themselves from that pull of all their emotions. Now the 5 can be very disciplined themselves, more so than the 4 sometimes, but because they're more of a mental, or what's called a head type, they're called the observer. And what they do about self-care is that they think about it a lot, they research it, they plan it because they're thinking about it. And often, if there was a caricature for a 5, it would be that they'd have this big head and this small body. So one of the best things for self-care for a 5 is exercise of some kind, movement. And the most balanced 5s I know have some kind of regular physical exercise. And that's the first key in all the others because it brings them down into their body. Oftentimes it will be solitary, like riding a bike by themselves or hiking by themselves or with just one person. But it still counts because it reminds them and gets them back into their intuition and other things that live in their body, just not their head. Now, the 6, the loyal skeptic, it can be challenged with their own self-care because they too are a mental type and they're thinking about it. They're also researching it and they're planning it. They're big planners. So they plan when they're going to go. They plan what they're going to wear. They're going to plan who they're going to meet. They're going to plan, look at all the diet plans if that's about it. They're going to plan if they're going to go to a new church. They're going to do one every week, whatever, because they're planning it all. But sometimes they get lost in the planning and don't actually take action. So if there was a motto for a 6, it would be just do it. So old Nike standpoint, just do it. Just do something. And it's sort of like jumping in the water. Once you're in the water, then you will swim. So just do it would be one of the best things that a 6 could do about starting their self-care. And then after that, it's a matter about that loyalty, that great loyalty that 6s can have, being loyal to themselves, being loyal to their own practices. And that will stay the course for them, for whatever it is they're choosing. Now, the 7 is called the adventure, and sometimes I call them the tiger of the Enneagram, because they're so vivacious and bouncy and happy and eager to see the next shiny object. And that can get in the way of a regular routine, because that could be boring, because the 7 does not want to be bored at all costs. So, however, what we don't want is usually the very thing we need. So for the 7, creating a good like a morning routine or any routine and sticking to it until it becomes fun. And now then you can beat the boredom, and you'll see more self-care for the 7. Now the 8 and the 9 are interesting because they're right next to each other, and they both have sort of a similar sort of way of minimizing their needs, but at opposite ends of the self-care spectrum. So what the 8 does is, because they are very forceful and have big energy, they approach things 100%. If you're going to do it all out. So for instance, they decide to sort of like weekend warriors. They'll take up a sport and just do it, and maybe be terribly sore afterwards, but just blow it off like, well, that's just kind of the way it is, because that's what you need to do if you're going to learn how to ski or skate or whatever it is. However, that's hard to sustain on a long basis. So they will get into something 100%, and then after a while, they just drop it, go back to old habits, and then frequently they'll go back. So the key for the 8 is realizing that they are vulnerable, and starting slow and staying slow with whatever it is. Instead of doing the diet that's so extreme, they can start with just eliminating a few of the things that don't work for them and then working their way up. Very hard for an 8 to do, because patience is not their strongest virtue, but a good way to practice. Now, the 9 is just the opposite. The 8 has all this big energy. The 9 has low energy for themselves. And so the difficulty is getting themselves to even start the practice, because they just, they're busy doing other things, kind of like the 7, except for the fact.
Could you try again?
Except that they will, they just don't have that big energy to get things done. So using a time clock, accountability is good for them. Sometimes doing things with other people will be helpful too, and just making sure that unconscious belief that a 9 can carry, which is that they don't matter, can be adjusted and say, I do matter, and I'm going to do this. So I don't know which one you may have identified with. Accountability is important to everybody when it comes to self-care, but some types need it more than others. So if you know your type, you might have found this useful. If you don't know your type, or if you'd like to take a deeper look at this, please come to my website at lindafrazee.com and check out my 5 free videos and take a look at all the information that will help you take better care of yourself starting today.